Is it not unsettling, this paradoxical truth of modernity? An era of total and unimpeded access to knowledge has spawned an entire generation frozen in perpetual inertia. We have mastered the art of imitating forward motion with such insidious brilliance that this masquerade has become our very essence. Millions of hours drain away, consumed by success podcasts, self-improvement tomes, and the meticulous forging of perfect future plans. Yet, reality itself remains an unyielding monolith. The sinister truth behind this pervasive stagnation lies in our brain's insidious reprogramming. It has learned to extract its dopamine fix not from tangible accomplishments, but from the mere ghost of their intention. The mere purchase of a gym membership, the digital hoarding of yet another article on productivity hacks. These phantom efforts are registered by our neural networks as heavy labor already accomplished. It is a masterful, filigree deception, an elaborate self-trick where the protracted act of preparing for life has utterly usurped life itself. We meticulously catalog the insights of others, clinging to the fervent, desperate hope that tomorrow will finally be the fabled point of no return. But tomorrow never dawns, for the fundamental architecture of our very psyche is grimly programmed for entirely different, more ancient directives. For centuries, society has relentlessly imposed upon us the concept of laziness, a deep character flaw, a shameful brand signifying a pathetic weakness of will and undeniable moral decay. Yet if one dares to cast aside this flimsy, artificial social construct and gaze upon human behavior through the cold, unfeeling lens of evolutionary biology, the landscape reveals a terrifying, stark rationality. Our brain is not, in fact, a glorious generator of grand achievements, nor is it an untiring engine of progress. It is a ruthless, pragmatic, and exquisitely parsimonious accountant whose singular, hardwired purpose is the absolute minimization of energy expenditure. This organ, comprising a mere 2% of our body mass, can, in a state of active thought, incinerate up to a quarter of all available energy. For hundreds of millennia, survival amidst brutal resource scarcity, biting cold, and ceaseless peril forged within us a perfect, unforgiving mechanism of energy conservation. Any action failing to guarantee immediate survival, procurement of sustenance, or propagation of the species is flagged by the central nervous system as a critical, system-threatening anomaly. When the irresistible urge to burrow deeper into the warm cocoon of comfort overtakes the impulse for a morning run or the daunting task of mastering a complex discipline, it is not a testament to a lack of discipline. It is the ancient echo of millions of ancestors, screaming the primal imperative to hoard precious calories against the coming winter. Biologically, we are still those same primates, whose neurochemistry lavishly rewards stillness and ruthlessly punishes unwarranted risk and the profligate expenditure of vital energy. The tragedy of the modern human is that this ancient, evolutionarily honed survival mechanism has found itself brutally transplanted into an utterly alien environment. The modern world has morphed into a perfect incubator for insidious degradation. The comfort industry has shattered our evolutionary algorithms, transforming our surroundings into a glittering, lethal trap of hyperstimuli. Dopamine, once a precious reward for arduous hunts or the perilous discovery of new territories, can now be conjured with a mere flick of a thumb across a smartphone screen. Why squander months and years clawing for true social status when digital reality offers an instantaneous, albeit hollow, illusion of significance? Have we not become willing captives in a gilded cage, where a deluge of cheap calories and incessant informational stimuli slowly narcotizes our inherent drive for expansion. Comfort is no longer a reward for arduous labor. It has transmuted into a potent anesthetic, subtly masking the slow, corrosive decay of unrealized potential. And it is precisely here that the most insidious of all illusions seizes the stage, the unshakable conviction of one's own singular exceptionalism. The vast majority of humanity harbors the delusion of belonging to that unique percentage, perpetually hovering above the faceless, gray throng. We scrutinize others, clearly discerning their weaknesses, their pathetic subservience to social media algorithms, their endless, sickening procrastination. But is this condescending smirk anything more than an exquisitely crafted defense mechanism of our own deceitful brain? Intelligence, that supposed beacon of progress, is all too often weaponized not to alter harsh reality, but to concoct the most meticulously logical justifications for our own insidious inaction. The higher the intellect, the more intricate, multi-layered, and devastatingly convincing are the alibis conjured by consciousness to preserve the stagnant status quo. I am not procrastinating. I am meticulously gathering crucial intelligence. I am not idle. I am merely awaiting the perfect window of opportunity. We can endlessly delude ourselves, whispering that we are merely conserving strength, seeking the optimal vector for initiation, preparing for a monumental leap. Yet, the brutal truth of biology knows no such comforting concept as a delayed start. The law of neuroplasticity is a merciless, dual-edged blade. We either forge the architecture of relentless development, perpetually overcoming resistance, or we irrevocably cement the foundations of our own decay. Lingering in a comfort zone is never a mere pause. It is an active, destructive process of neural degradation, masterfully cloaked in the deceptive guise of life stability. Every squandered opportunity, every effortless path chosen over the arduous, necessary one. Each is a physical transmutation within the brain's very microstructure, rendering the next genuine step towards true development even more arduous, even more grotesquely impossible. The illusion of absolute control over one's own existence dissolves into the cold, unforgiving air precisely at the moment of a truly chilling realization. The very reins of our decisions have long since been surrendered to the darkest, most ancient structures of our nervous system, which harbor an utter and profound indifference to our fleeting ambitions. Inside the dark bone box, stripped of light and sound, a ceaseless and ruthless struggle unfolds for the only true currency of our existence, biological energy. Evolution forged this 3-kilogram mass of matter not for us to achieve greatness, compose symphonies, or become better versions of ourselves. The sole purpose of this hyper-complex architecture is survival, and the primary tool for survival is a total, aggressive conservation of internal resources. The brain constitutes merely 2% of the total body mass, yet devours up to 20% of all oxygen and glucose. It is a metabolic monster, constantly under the invisible threat of energetic bankruptcy. It is this primal fear of depletion that shapes what we naively call our personality, our habits, and our laziness. When the impulse arises to change one's life, learn a new language, or embark on a complex intellectual project, the cerebral cortex takes the initiative, specifically its prefrontal lobe. This is the newest, most delicate, and most exquisite part of our neural network. It is responsible for consciousness, abstract thought, willpower, and future planning. But this evolutionary luxury comes at an exorbitant price. The cortex's operation demands colossal expenditure of ATP molecules, the universal source of cellular energy. The formation of a new neural connection is no abstract metaphor. It is a real physical process of massive construction at a microscopic level. The system must cultivate new dendritic spines, increase the number of receptors in the synaptic cleft, and insulate the new pathway with thick myelin for signal speed. For a biological mechanism, this is equivalent to constructing a multi-lane highway through impenetrable jungle. It is here that an ancient, cold, and utterly pragmatic mechanism enters the fray, the basal ganglia. Nestled deep beneath the cortex, closer to the brainstem, they function as an impeccable archivist. Their primary task is to recognize any repeated action, package it into a dense algorithm, and permanently shift it into autopilot mode. The basal ganglia require no consciousness. They do not analyze whether an action benefits your long-term future or if it is destructive. They merely register a fact. This path is already trodden, and thus, traversing it demands almost no energy expenditure. The neural signal slides instantaneously along old, well-myelinated pathways with no resistance whatsoever. This is a zone of absolute metabolic comfort, where the brain enters standby mode, conserving its resources. Any attempt to break free from an established pattern is met with rigid, almost physical resistance. The neurobiology of this process resembles premeditated sabotage from within. When the cerebral cortex attempts to forge a new route, the system sounds the alarm. Internal sensors register an anomalous glucose expenditure. The brain interprets this not as a noble aspiration for self-improvement, but as a critical threat to homeostasis. In response, a cascade of chemical reactions is instantly triggered, designed to halt this profligacy. Dopamine levels plummet, inducing feelings of unbearable boredom, apathy, and disillusionment. Stress hormones are released, creating a pervasive, creeping anxiety. A heavy, suffocating fatigue engulfs us, entirely unrelated to actual physical exhaustion. It is merely a neurochemical illusion, a cunning trick devised by nature to compel us back to the path of least resistance. Are we not held captive by this cold mathematics of survival? We genuinely believe we are making conscious choices when we defer difficult tasks or revert to old, familiar destructive habits. But in reality, we are merely helpless observers as our nervous system optimizes its expenditures. The brain will always choose familiar pain over unknown effort, for pain has already been calculated by the basal ganglia and requires no new neural investment, whereas effort threatens unforeseen metabolic losses. New neural connections are always an immense risk for a system that has survived for millions of years solely under conditions of severe caloric scarcity. In the modern world, where resources are available around the clock, this ancient energy conservation mechanism has transformed into our personal internal prison. The brain continues to thwart our efforts as if, the next morning, we are destined to awaken in a harsh ice age, where every carelessly spent calorie could cost us our lives. It meticulously protects us from progress, preserving consciousness within a safe, yet utterly dead zone of automatisms. To break through this thick neurobiological shield means to defy our very nature, to declare a merciless war against the most ancient instincts that silently govern the allocation of energy within the dark, uncharted labyrinths of our mind. The neurotransmitter dopamine is often mistakenly called the happiness hormone. This is a profound deception, warping our understanding of our own nature. It doesn't grant pleasure, it merely promises it. It is a molecule of anticipation, a chemical whip that evolution forged to compel a primate to rise, abandon its sanctuary, and risk its very existence for calories or reproduction. The mesolimbic pathway of our brain was sculpted in a world of absolute scarcity, where every reward demanded colossal expenditures of energy, physical pain, patience, and time. For millennia, this system operated with chilling precision. A dopamine surge was a rarity, a precious biological resource. The phasic release of the neurotransmitter occurred only after a prolonged hunt or grueling labor at the precipice of survival. Could our ancestors have ever conceived that their most intricate mechanism, honed by ruthless natural selection, would be shattered not by a ferocious predator, but by the cold light emanating from a rectangular shard of glass and metal? The modern entertainment industry and social media have orchestrated the most massive, silent biohacking in human history. They ruthlessly severed the natural link between effort and outcome, birthing the phenomenon of cheap dopamine. The endless news feed, fleeting videos, instant messages. These are a synthetic neurochemical narcotic injected into the brain without a single drop of physical or intellectual energy expended. Each swipe of the screen is a microdose of a potent stimulant. The algorithms of these platforms are crafted not merely by programmers, but by brilliant engineers of human behavior who understand precisely how to exploit the reward prediction error. We never truly know what the next video will reveal, and it is this controlled unpredictability that compels the brain to release molecules of desire again and again, transforming users into lab rats trapped within a colossal, unseen labyrinth. What transpires within a finely tuned biological system when it is assailed by an avalanche of such endless, hypertrophied stimulation? The cold mechanism of homeostasis activates. The brain is an extraordinarily adaptive organ, relentlessly striving for internal equilibrium above all else. Shielding itself from toxic overload and attempting to quell the neurochemical din, it begins to physically reduce the number of D2 dopamine receptors. This process is known in neurobiology as downregulation. The very architecture of the brain shifts at a cellular level. The nervous system's capacity to respond to any stimuli whatsoever diminishes. The baseline, tonic level of dopamine plummets far below natural norms, leaving in its wake the scorched earth of a dull, gray apathy. It is at this juncture of irreversible physiological adaptation that the death of motivation occurs. Complex, long-term tasks, coding, mastering a foreign language, building a business, or even immersing oneself in profound literature, demand a critical capacity for delayed gratification. They generate a slow, subtle, yet stable dopamine signal. Yet, how can this fragile, natural impulse penetrate receptors that have been irrevocably scorched by the incessant chemical detonations of social media consumption? For a brain adapted to extreme overstimulation, sustained concentration becomes more than merely tedious. It becomes physiologically impossible, physically agonizing. The body refuses to release enough neurotransmitter to overcome the initial barrier of resistance. One sits down to a demanding task, only to experience a genuine withdrawal, an emptiness in the chest, mounting anxiety, a dull discomfort that compels the hand to reflexively reach for the phone. This is not the absence of mythical willpower, nor merely mundane laziness. This is a state of profound clinical deficiency within the reward system. Unbeknownst to ourselves, we have confined our minds within an artificial environment where the most primitive, senseless actions yield maximum neurochemical profit. This cynical inversion of values at the synaptic level utterly devalues everything that demands time, pain, and genuine concentration. Are we not, today, willing hostages to the architecture of applications that methodically drain our motivational capital in exchange for dazzling digital illusions? When the mechanism of goal achievement is fractured from within, one loses the fundamental capacity to project their own future. They become trapped within an endless, anxious present, frantically seeking the next fleeting stimulus merely to feel normal for a moment. The capacity for deep thought, for creation, for overcoming genuine obstacles, quietly perishes, forever interred beneath tons of glittering informational debris that burns us from within. Evolution was never interested in your uniqueness. Its mathematics are cold, merciless, and utterly indifferent to individual genius or spiritual quests. If we shift our gaze from microscopic neural circuits to the macro level of social biology, a picture emerges that shatters the brightest humanist illusions. In the tall grass of the African savanna, where our species formed hundreds of thousands of years ago, bright individuality was not a gift, but a death sentence. Imagine a primitive tribe as a closed, paranoid ecosystem where everyone performs a strictly defined function. The one who runs faster than others risks becoming separated from the group and falling prey to a predator. The one who thinks too unconventionally questions the authority of the chief, provoking schism, chaos, and bloodshed. Nature quickly learned this lesson. Any deviation from the norm is a direct threat to the survival of the population. Natural selection began to operate like an invisible guillotine, methodically severing everything that rose above the crowd. It wasn't the titans of thought or the fearless rebels who survived. It was those who could perfectly blend into the background, those whose pulse beat in absolute unison with the pulse of the herd. Conformity became the most effective survival strategy, permanently stitched into our genetic code. The fear of being exiled from the tribe was equivalent to the fear of a slow death, for solitude in the wild meant inevitable demise by fangs or starvation. This primal terror of social isolation never disappeared with the advent of civilization. It merely changed its scenery. Are we not, today, hostages to that same biological program, panicking at the fear of social condemnation, adjusting our tastes, political views, and our very identity to the expectations of the silent majority? Mimicry has become our second nature. We evolved to be mediocre because it was faceless mediocrity that guaranteed the safe transmission of genes to subsequent generations. Our brain's neurochemistry was rewired to reward this self-abnegation. When we receive group approval, the hypothalamus generously floods consciousness with dopamine. We feel warmth, calm, and security. But when we go against the current, the same centers responsible for physical trauma activate in the brain. To be rejected is to literally feel pain on a physiological level. Nature created an ideal internal overseer, one that renders us submissive even before society can raise its whip. Herein lies the deepest, darkest philosophical horror of our existence. The biological success of the species was bought at the cost of the individual's existential death. To be like everyone else is the strongest shield against the dangers of the external world. It is the comfortable, warm womb of collective irresponsibility, where there is no need to make painful decisions. But this very shield slowly and inexorably suffocates the one thing that makes a human more than a piece of organic matter. Dissolving into the crowd for the illusion of safety, we voluntarily erase our own faces. Modern culture masterfully masks this abyss, selling us ersatz individuality. We are allowed to choose the color of our smartphone, the brand of our clothing, or a musical genre, and we naively believe this to be an expression of free will. But on fundamental questions, how to think, what to believe, whom to hate, and what to fear, we remain utterly predictable biological automatons. This sanctioned, safe rebellion within the rigid confines of a preset paradigm only reinforces the walls of our invisible prison. Every time you suppress an unconventional thought to avoid seeming strange, every time you choose the beaten path instead of the unknown, the voice of a distant ancestor speaks within you, one who simply wanted to survive until morning. This voice insistently whispers that standing out is suicide. Social biology leaves us no room for maneuver. Any system will always strive for homeostasis, and a vibrant personality is regarded by it as a virus disrupting that dead calm. We find ourselves in an ideal trap. Our brain uses all its colossal computational power not to liberate us, but to rationalize our intellectual and spiritual surrender. To survive physically means to dissolve into the gray mass. To preserve oneself as an individual means to defy millions of years of evolution, voluntarily becoming a target. This is a chilling choice between biological triumph and spiritual annihilation. The true tragedy is not that our lives are finite. The tragedy is that for the sake of a comfortable and safe existence, we agree never to truly be born. Neuroplasticity has been embraced as a universal indulgence. We are sold the illusion that the brain is capable of infinite renewal, as if guaranteeing eternal youth of the mind and the perpetual chance to start anew. Yet, biology is utterly devoid of sentiment. It bows to a single, ruthless law: absolute metabolic efficiency. The brain, consuming a fifth of the body's entire energy, stands as nature's most austere and cynical accountant. It will never fund infrastructure not vital for survival or confronting challenges. This is the inverted dark side of neuroplasticity, a process that, with scientific precision, can be termed the architecture of decay. The fundamental principle of evolutionary neurobiology sounds simple, yet utterly damning. Use it or lose it. When neural circuits responsible for complex analysis, long-term planning, empathy, and overcoming internal obstacles remain without proper stimulation, the mechanism of synaptic pruning is triggered. This isn't a poetic metaphor. It's a brutal, physical process of connection annihilation. Microglia, specialized immune cells of the brain, transform into a demolition squad, literally devouring inactive synapses. Every choice for the path of least resistance, every thought outsourced to algorithms, every hour of passively consuming endless content sends a clear biochemical signal to the microglia. These intricate neural pathways are no longer necessary. They must be obliterated to conserve calories. Have we not become voluntary captives within an artificial environment, where the absence of cognitive friction is lauded as the pinnacle of civilized progress? The modern digital comfort industry has engineered ideal, laboratory-calibrated conditions for the mass atrophy of will. The navigator plots an infallible route. The news feed meticulously shapes our worldview. Recommendation systems dictate what we listen to, buy, and even feel. In this state of intellectual weightlessness, the prefrontal cortex, the evolutionary crown of our species, the center of conscious decision-making and volitional control, begins to rapidly degrade. Without the daily struggle against resistance, without the exhausting and painful process of deep concentration, the thickness of gray matter in these critically vital areas relentlessly diminishes. We are, in essence, financing our own simplification. The consequences of this comfortable degradation possess a very real, measurable dimension, and cognitive flexibility is the first to fall under the knife. The capacity to simultaneously hold conflicting concepts, to adapt to unforeseen changes, to generate original solutions, is supplanted by a horrific rigidity. Thought becomes patterned, narrow, entirely reactive, reduced to the primitive reflexes of a binary reward system. This is a state where any complex reality triggers not interest, but panic, provoking an irresistible urge to retreat into an even deeper, tighter informational bubble. What society habitually labels chronic fatigue, burnout, or simple laziness is, at the cellular level, the premature aging of the brain. Neurophysiological scans of individuals who have shunned purposeful intellectual exertion for years eerily resemble those of patients in the early stages of dementia. A sharp decline in dendritic spine density is recorded, alongside a disruption of the myelin sheath integrity in white matter, which ensures rapid signal transmission. The inner cosmos of humanity physically shrivels, contracting to microscopic dimensions. The brain's biological clock accelerates several-fold, transforming young, healthy bodies into vessels of senile, feeble consciousness. Yet, the true horror lies in an invisible threshold, one that inexorably approaches with each day of such passive existence. Science proves a critical threshold of synaptic density loss exists. This is the absolute point of no return. When the degradation of prefrontal circuits reaches a certain mathematical depth, the very instrument capable of initiating any change vanishes. The atrophy of will becomes total and irreversible, for the physical substrate that would generate the effort to escape this paralysis has already been disassembled into molecules. It's impossible to start an engine if its parts have been melted down into scrap. The individual who crosses this threshold loses the capacity to even comprehend the magnitude of their own catastrophe. They simply lack the neural power to construct a complex chain of critical self-analysis. During this fatal transition, no alarm sirens will sound. The disaster unfolds in complete silence within the warm, comfortable cocoon of continuous digital stimulation. The brain continues to sustain the body's vital functions, but is no longer the instrument of a creator, a thinker, or a free individual. It transforms into a mere receiver of basic signals, an obedient biological appendage to the global network, having forever lost the ability to shape its own destiny. Evolution forged us for survival in a world where every calorie was a scarce commodity, and danger an incessant, inescapable backdrop to existence. Our brain, that ancient, flawless computer, was programmed with three primal directives: the pursuit of tranquility, the conservation of energy, and the evasion of pain. Are we not, today, prisoners of this archaic architecture? Humanity has constructed the perfect incubator. Plush chairs, climate control, an uninterrupted torrent of cheap dopamine, and refined sustenance have transmuted our environment into a warm, secure capsule. But this absolute, unyielding comfort has proven to be the Trojan horse of our civilization. The absence of natural stimuli ignites a slow, irreversible process of decay. Muscle atrophy, the degradation of neural pathways, and the extinguishing of the very will to live. Yet, embedded within this flawless biological code lies a critical vulnerability. The system can be breached, the rules of the game rewritten from within. The key to this exploit resides in a phenomenon known as hormesis. It is a paradoxical physiological response where a measured, deliberate exposure to a stressor triggers a formidable adaptive reaction. What obliterates on a grand scale, in microdoses becomes the catalyst for an evolutionary leap. Our cells do not merely tolerate temporary discomfort. They harness it as raw material for profound regeneration. When we deliberately strip ourselves of accustomed ease, we bypass the comfort-induced blockades and forcibly activate dormant survival genes. This is the high-precision engineering of our very physiology. The first potent instrument of this rebellion is thermal shock. Ice-cold water, searing the skin, forces blood vessels to violently constrict, unleashing colossal doses of norepinephrine and endorphins into the bloodstream. This chemical alarm signal instantly purges consciousness of informational noise, rebooting the exhausted nervous system. Contrasting heat stress, mimicking fever, compels the body to produce specific heat shock proteins. These molecular chaperones patrol the body, locating and repairing damaged cellular structures, halting the relentless march of cellular senescence. The second instrument, metabolic pause. The deliberate denial of sustenance for a set period initiates the mechanism of autophagy. Deprived of external energy sources, the organism begins to scour its own reserves. Cells begin to literally devour their own internal refuse, transforming defective proteins, toxins, and aged organelles into pure energy. Hunger, in this context, ceases to be an animalistic dread. It becomes a surgical scalpel, methodically excising weakness from within, restoring the body to its primordial purity of function. The third vector of neurobiological breach lies in the realm of physical exhaustion. Muscles and tendons must regularly encounter resistance, bordering on their physical breaking point. Weight training or sprinting until vision blurs mimics a fight for survival for our reptilian brain. Receiving this signal, the body is compelled to increase bone density and synthesize new muscle fibers, preparing for the next hypothetical threat. We cheat death by simulating its approach. The fourth instrument, cognitive friction. Our brain maniacally strives for automatism, to minimize glucose expenditure, to force it to forge new neural pathways, to master complex concepts, to solve atypical problems, to ruthlessly shatter daily routines, is to defy its fundamental nature. This is a painful, grueling process, invariably accompanied by a stark sensation of one's own inadequacy. But it is precisely this intellectual torment that serves as the sole reliable indicator of neuroplasticity. Where habit ends, true evolution begins. Every act of such deliberate discomfort is a reclamation of control over one's own destiny. We are no longer passive consumers of conveniences, slowly dissolving into the softness of our existence. We become ruthless architects of our own evolution. The dopamine system, ravaged by cheap digital stimuli and endless consumption, begins to restore its primal sensitivity through controlled stress. True joy returns not through the acquisition of novelty, but through the conquest of hardship. Is this not the supreme form of freedom? The ability to autonomously choose one's own pain, instead of passively waiting for blind chance or chronic illness to impose it. This daily rebellion against our own biology must become the inner core of the new human. The rejection of the escalator for the stairs. Cold in place of warmth. Focus instead of diffusion. Silence instead of background cacophony. This is not merely a collection of wellness practices. It is a profound philosophical act of defiance. Tearing ourselves from the sticky trap of comfortable degradation, we seize ancient survival instincts and transmute them into instruments of unprecedented cognitive and physical dominance. Natural evolution has stalled. having crafted the perfect, compliant consumer, but we possess the power and the will to write the next line of our code ourselves.